all of the Christian faith, right? All of the Christian message and the hope that we have in Jesus and in the story of the gospel hangs on the truthfulness of the resurrection.
Gideon.
Daquan.
It's good to see you.
What's up, y'all?
I think before we start, we just need to take a look at Gideon's drip today.
Yeah.
I think
Fit
as
check?
fit check.
Fit check.
Fit check. Here's the fit
All
check.
right. I got the Nikes on. I got some Adidas ankle socks to go with them.
There you go.
Right, a little combo. I got these overalls I'm wearing.
Those things are.
These overalls. So I maybe shouldn't admit to this, but I used to work at a camp, and this was in the costume box behind the stage, and I loved the overalls, so I took them, and now they're mine.
You
So
mean
there's
you stole them?
There's a stain right here, and then I got the Shaquille O'Neal shirt, and then I got just like this bracelet, and that's it. So,
Okay.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I think we're missing something.
Yeah.
well, I mentioned the overalls, the shoes, the socks, the Shaquille O'Neal shirt.
We missed the shirt, man. We're missing the shirt, dude.
The shirt?
Yeah, you gotta show us the
Oh,
shirt.
yeah, it's a black shirt.
No, the world wants to see the shirt. You gotta unhook
The
it.
shirt underneath?
Yeah.
All right. For our audio listeners, I'm taking my overalls off.
Shaquille
There you go.
Oatmeal.
Shaquille O'Neal.
There you go.
Yeah, that's right. My brother-in-law got this for me.
Yeah.
This
Believe it or
dude
not.
probably
Dude, that's
doesn't
hype.
even eat Quaker's Oats.
He probably eats the
What's that?
He probably eat the whole aisle.
Dude, can I tell you something? I hate oatmeal. I've always hated oatmeal.
Dude, how do you hate oatmeal?
It's not.
What do you eat for breakfast?
Oatmeal is
bacon,
like
biscuits.
what a cow eats for breakfast, and it's like a cow's cud. Like he eats it and then he throws it back up, and then you got your oatmeal.
Gosh, man.
What?
This dude. We're real good at biology here.
All right, whatever.
That's how it
well,
works.
guys, if you didn't notice, we have Grant joining us today.
Yep.
Super excited for him to be here.
Stud.
Yeah, he is a stud.
Yeah.
Looking
Nice.
good. Daquan, you're looking ripped, actually, by the way.
Oh, well, thanks.
Actually, just your right pec looks ripped.
Wow.
Not your left. Yeah, no.
That might just be the lighting.
It's a muscle
Yeah,
imbalance.
Let us know in the comments. No, I'm joking. Well, guys, today we're going to be talking about the resurrection, and we're going to talk about why it's important, how we can verify it historically, and maybe how to incorporate these facts we're going to talk about into conversation on the street or with your friends or whatever else. So I want to start off first and foremost with, we have the resurrection. We know that it's really important for the Christian faith. And so the question is, why? Why is it so important that Jesus had to rise from the dead? And I know there's plenty of scripture on this, so just briefly, if you guys can give me a summary, Grant, why is it you think that the resurrection is so vital to the Christian faith?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'm going to do for us actually real quick is just read 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 4, right? This is part of Paul's gospel presentation in the letter to the Corinthians, all right? And so it says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. And he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep," right? And so in Paul's gospel presentation to the Corinthians, one of the central points is that Jesus not only died, but then was resurrected to new life. And one of the things he also says later in the letter, in 1 Corinthians 15, 12 through 17, is he talks about how Christ's resurrection is the first fruits, or is the assurance of our resurrection one day, right? And so all of the Christian faith, right, all of the Christian message, and the hope that we have in Jesus and in the story of the gospel hangs on the truthfulness of the resurrection.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I would say the resurrection is the most important event in human history. Right now, to make that kind of claim, that already may rub some people the wrong way, right? Just because that means something happened at a point in history.
You've got like
right?
Gladiator
Yeah.
coming out. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got like the Olympics in like the 1940s. That was pretty big. But you're saying the
sure.
resurrection.
Yeah, it would probably definitely be bigger than those things and probably anything else that you can name. And so to say something is the most important event in human history, we have to be able to trace it back to human history, right? And this is kind of what we're going to be getting into today. But there seems to be overwhelming evidence to suggest that Jesus is someone who actually lived, who actually died, and was seen later after his crucifixion.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and kind of hop into the weeds here. There's this famous apologist who is been affiliated with Liberty for many, many years now. His name is Gary Habermas. And this guy is a super smart guy. He teaches at the doctorate level. And his life focus has been on the resurrection and the historical validity of it, right? So he's a historian, and he uses the studies done by other historians to kind of look at the evidence of whether or not the resurrection happened, and then from that evidence draw out this final conclusion that what makes the most sense of all of the data that we have is that Jesus really did exist, die, rise again, and ascend into heaven. And that all of the data kind of points to that reality. And this argument that he's developed over the course of his lifetime is often known as the minimal facts argument. And what this argument does at its very core is it takes what at least 90% of historians, secular or Christian, whoever these historians might be, anything that 90% of them will agree on, he will include in this argument. And then there's a couple of other points that he adds to this argument that 75% of historians or more agree on. And he uses these truths that scholarly consensus will say is true to establish certain small facts. And these facts by themselves don't mean a lot, right? For example, nowadays, essentially every single historian will agree that Jesus was a real person, right? There's very few people who have really ever existed since the time of Jesus who would deny that Jesus was a real person. The question is, for the Muslim, did he actually die? For the atheist, did he really rise again? Etc. And so these small facts kind of add up, and they paint this picture of Jesus actually living, dying, rising again. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through these 12 facts, and I want us all to give kind of our insight into which of these facts you find to be the most important, which ones you rely on most often in conversation, and also maybe at the end we'll go through an exercise where we look at maybe some of the alternate realities that could have happened, right? Like if Jesus didn't really die and rise again, if he really wasn't God, what could have happened? Was he just dragged out of the tomb by the disciples and hidden? Did he get a bunch of people, including his own brother, to lie and get persecuted all the way to their death for this lie? Or whatever else, right? So we're going to start off, though, by going through these 12 historical facts. And I want to start off with what Habermas and a couple other scholars call the 3 core facts of the resurrection. So core fact number 1, the disciples of Jesus, were transformed from doubters who were afraid to identify themselves with Jesus to bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. This is one of those things that 90% of historians will agree on, that the disciples really did have this moment where they were really scared to be associated with Jesus, but then something happened and they switched, and suddenly they were the biggest proclaimers of Jesus' resurrection right afterwards. Whether or not that means he actually rose from the dead is another question.
Right.
But it is true that the disciples really did have something that switched in them, and that all of them ended up dying for their faith.
Yeah. So I just wanted to back up a little bit and just talk about maybe court cases a little bit, because I think you brought up a great point that these facts individually are not like some kind of like knockout punch, right? But them together, which we would call this a cumulative case, can build a strong case for the evidence for the resurrection. And I think in a court case, you usually talk about direct and indirect evidence. Now, direct evidence is what you get from maybe someone who is an eyewitness, someone who is at the scene of whatever event, right? And they can testify to it. Now, indirect evidence is things that you pull from other places surrounding that moment in history to help you reach the most reasonable conclusion, right? And so I think that's maybe, it can be very helpful for the viewers as they're thinking about all of these facts together. And then when we think about specifically the point that you just mentioned, when we look at the records showing that maybe, for example, someone like James, who was a doubter, now had led a church in Jerusalem for 14 years after the resurrection, a question that we could ask is, what is the cause of something like this? What is the cause of this kind of behavior? It can't be that he, for whatever reason, believed Jesus resurrected, but he didn't, right? It has to be something more powerful than that, right? And so we just have to start asking these kind of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think too, the spread of early Christianity, right, is ultimately through the power and authority of a lot of the 12 apostles, right? Even in church tradition, right? A lot of the different movements, whether they're in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, right, or can ultimately trace somewhere back to one of the different apostles, right, who saw the risen Jesus, right, after he was crucified. And like they went and they hid in Jerusalem, right, afterwards, after the crucifixion, because they were afraid of what was going to happen to them, right? So, I mean, like, there's this moment where they're afraid, and then they're confronted with these different stories, right? Whether it's of Jesus coming in, right, like through the door, like kind of just like that cool story where he like phases through the door, right? Or whether he's eating like the fish, right, to prove that he's not like some kind of spirit, right? Like they're confronted with the risen Jesus, and then ultimately, like Daquan's saying, they go out and they live these powerful lives, right, proclaiming the gospel that Jesus actually has risen and now is ascended into the right hand of the Father. Yeah. And so, I mean, and church tradition, right, can attest to that, right? And the spread of early Christianity attests to that as well.
Yeah. This is what we call multiple attestation, where we can go outside of the Bible and pull these different facts, just like Grant mentioned. Another thing that most scholars would point to is what they call embarrassing testimony, right? Yeah. Why would I add in that I was scared, I ran away? Like, that's not, if I'm making a story, that's not things that I would add about myself or my constituents. Right? Yeah. No.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I were to write like an autobiography of my own life, I wouldn't have any moments like that because I've never done anything like that.
Yeah, you're a G.
Yeah. But yeah, that's cool the disciples did that though.
Yeah, you didn't see Gideon crying before this podcast.
All right, so that's core fact number one, that the historians largely agree that the disciples were transformed from doubters who were afraid to identify themselves as Jesus to bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. Core fact number two is that Jesus died by crucifixion. This is another fact that 90% of scholars agree on. And this is a really big one. You might think, well, of course, Jesus died by crucifixion. He had to die some way, and the way that we have all the evidence for is that it was through his crucifixion. But you'd be surprised at how many other religions, probably the biggest of which is Islam, would deny this very core claim of Christianity. And it's actually really interesting to see in the Islamic community that some of their best scholars are actually drifting away from traditional Islam and actually saying that Jesus really was crucified, and that in some way they have perhaps misunderstood the Quran up until this point, because there's just such overwhelming evidence for the physical death of Jesus on the cross.
Wow.
So this is a super, super important point. And it's really cool to see that even scholars outside of the realm of Christianity are starting to concede on this very important point. Yeah. Because again, just like the resurrection, the crucifixion of Jesus is how we are able to find the atonement for our sins. It's absolutely critical to the Christian story as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, just think if Jesus was crucified, right, but didn't die, which was historically unheard of, right? I mean, the crucifixion was mainly reserved for slaves, right? It was one of the worst possible ways to die. As the Romans perfected it, right, from the Persians, right? And so no one really survives the crucifixion. But let's just say for a second that someone did survive crucifixion. Imagine what state they would be in, right? We just talked about how the disciples believed that they had a real encounter with the risen Jesus, right? And this is what informed the way that they then went and shared the gospel with the rest of the world. That's no king who's walking off that cross. That is someone who is beaten to death, like he's beaten half to death before he even gets on the cross, right? And then has holes all in him. Like, that is not your savior king that the Jews were anticipating, right? But that is someone who is, for lack of better words, right, on their last leg. You know what I'm saying? They're almost dead before that, you know? So, I mean, I think that's another really compelling piece of evidence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a great point that we'll get a little bit more into in a second. But yeah, you're right. The Romans were excellent at what they did. Right. And they had this crazy method of being able to crucify people that included a ridiculous amount of stuff beforehand, just preparing people to be as weak as possible whenever they did get up on the cross. Yeah. So you're right. It is very difficult to look at the evidence for that and say that Jesus somehow survived a Roman crucifixion, something that is unheard of. throughout all of history.
Yeah.
Daquan, what were you going to say on that?
Well, a lot of what Grant said. I think we can, again, with multiple attestation, we can look at that time in history. Were crucifixions actually happening? We can say yes. Okay. Were the Romans good at killing? We can say yes. And then we can put these things together. And I think it's reasonable to conclude that something like this happened to Jesus. And something I just thought about recently is this also poses some theological problems. If Jesus went up on the cross, but he came down on the cross, he never died on the cross, like what do we do with our sin? Right? Yeah. So these create a lot of problems. So like being able to verify that Jesus was actually crucified, that he died, and that he rose, again, is going to be important for not only to establish that the tomb was empty, but for us to be redeemed of our sin as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of the core claims, right, of Christianity, right, is ultimately that Jesus, through his resurrection, has victory over death.
Yeah.
Right? And if Jesus actually doesn't die, then that isn't a reality for us.
Which
right?
we're in trouble.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and like you said, the Romans were so good at killing people. I mean, all you have to do is watch like Gladiator, right? You can get like a great kind of visual for that, or read stories about the Colosseum.
Yeah.
I was actually able to go there, and I mean, this like listen to the tour guide talk about like all the different stories they had. They had like a curriculum for like different ways they would like have people ready to die. That's pretty sick.
I sometimes think about the flagrum. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Where it's a whip, and then at the end it's like the balls with the little spikes.
Oh, the cat of nine tails.
The cat of nine tails.
Yeah. That's brutal.
Yeah.
Just skin just coming off.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So Passions of Christ. Watch something like that. Yeah.
Right. A great movie.
Yeah.
All right, so we're sitting at our second of, I said 3 core facts earlier, I actually meant 4, my apologies. But, so
forgiven.
core fact number 1, the disciples were became doubters of Jesus from his crucifixion, had something happen, and they switched it a 180 and became the bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. Number 2, Jesus really did die by crucifixion. And then core fact number 3, the disciples had experiences which they believed were literal appearances of the risen Jesus. We have a lot of either firsthand or secondhand eyewitness account of the disciples of Jesus, who were in general his followers, including the apostles, but also extending to the other eyewitnesses, who believed that they had a literal interaction with a physically, bodily risen Jesus. Whether or not Jesus actually did rise from the dead, again, is a different question. But did the disciples really believe that that happened? All of the evidence throughout history points to yes. They really did believe that this happened. And this is evidenced by the fact that not only did they, write their accounts of that happening, but they also went to their brutal deaths proclaiming this very truth. And they were persecuted in many ways for proclaiming that. And personally, I'm not willing to endure any kind of suffering for a truth that I don't believe in. And so to have 500 eyewitnesses all go to their, endure certain types of persecution without any of them, we don't have any record of any of them breaking and saying, oh man, like we were actually lying about this. We were all doing like this big prank on civilization for all, like the rest of time, stuff like that. Is really, really remarkable. And that's something that you definitely would not find if they did not have true grounded beliefs that they really did meet a physically risen Jesus.
Yeah, I think their behavior communicates that they truly believe what they saw was actually real. And I think something we talked about before in the past is maybe different types of aberrations. And the one that most would say is more closely to what we see in this narrative is what is called the post-mortem aberration. And so there's a few things that were even the post-mortem aberration, the resurrection account separates itself from the post-mortem aberration, such as I believe it's less than 2% of these aberrations are seen by the enemy of those who was in the aberration. And so when we take into account Paul, who saw Jesus in Acts 9, right? And so these things don't tend to happen. We even have very few to none aberrations are seen in the context of either eating or indoors, but we see that in the Gospels. It's just a few accounts that we see in the Gospel narrative of the resurrection that doesn't even line up with the data, proving that statistically, at the very least, this is extremely rare, and that there's good reason to believe that this actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like the Gospel authors are aware that people might believe that Jesus has not resurrected in the flesh, right? And maybe even some of the disciples, right? Even someone like Thomas might have been aware of something like that. And so there are like little hints, as Daquan's saying, that the text is trying to make it very clear. No, this Jesus has resurrected bodily, right? And that ultimately is foundational for the hope of Christianity, right? That one day we will experience a bodily resurrection as well, right? So I think that it's very clear the text is trying to communicate a bodily resurrection and not some kind of spirit or disembodied existence, right?
Yeah.
I think that's foundational to the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Right?
That seems like a major point throughout John's epistles, right?
Yeah.
First John, second John, and I would even say we can probably go back to 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul even like opens up this opportunity for himself to be falsified. Again, if I'm making up a story, trying to communicate whatever, I'm not going to give you like the people that you can go check to see whether or not what I'm saying is true, right? But Paul does just that in the same chapter that Grant read earlier.
He's giving receipts.
Yeah,
he's giving receipts. He's like, Paul's using QuickBooks or something.
That's crazy.
You guys know that app, the Fetch app, where you can scan the receipts and get money for it?
Like points?
Dude, what?
Yeah.
Like whole points or money? Because I've heard of points.
Money. Well, you can get like gift cards from the points.
What kind of gift cards?
Amazon.
Sheesh.
I feel like Gideon's an absolute animal when it comes to gift cards.
Dude, yesterday I rolled up to Joe Bean's. I had $4 or $5 gift cards because my wife was a teacher and she doesn't like Joe Bean's, but people kept on giving her these Joe Bean's gift cards, and so guess who got them?
Dude, that reminds me, man. I gotta buy one get one free at Jersey Mike's right now,
dude.
And I gotta use it in the next like 3 days.
Can I tell you guys something crazy real quick? I'm sorry, we're so off topic. Just immediately. Dude, I love Jersey Mike's. Dude, I have the app. Dude. I have so many points.
You want a sandwich? I got like 5 coupons. You guys want one?
Dude, heck yeah. Dude, let's go after
some Christmas thing. Okay. Yeah, I mean,
some Christmas thing.
I don't know. I don't know. It's too long to explain.
Dude, every time I get in there, I'm like, dude, Mike's got to get warmed up in the back because I'm about to get it his way.
That's good.
All right, anyway, so we got our 3 core facts so far. We have the disciples who were doubters, who were scared to identify themselves with Jesus, who began to proclaim his death and resurrection. We have that Jesus really did die by crucifixion. We have the disciples experienced they believed that they experienced a literal bodily resurrected Jesus. And the 4th core fact, I think, is a very, very interesting one. And it centers around this guy named Paul. Paul, previously known as Saul, was this really, really well-trained rabbi who was this traditional Jewish guy, did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, did not believe that Jesus really did rise again. Because if that were true, then that would confirm that Jesus' claims about being God were really real. And was one of the biggest proponents of martyring Christians immediately after the crucifixion of Jesus. And he went around, he was in charge of imprisoning people, sometimes probably responsible for the murder of some Christians, and just this really, really terrible person in terms of trying to shut down this new cult that became known as Christianity. And something happened in his life where he turned away from this avid Christian hater to someone who became perhaps the most important figure in Christian history in terms of establishing churches all throughout Asia and around the world in that time, and writing all these letters that we have today. If you include Hebrews, over half of the New Testament written by Paul. And so Paul had some sort of experience where he was just the #1 Christian op, and he had some sort of switch that he believed was the appearance of the risen Jesus that caused him to do a complete 180 and start to establish, through many, many sufferings, the early church, eventually leading to his own death, according to church history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating that in Luke's recording of Acts, he includes, like, after Stephen's death, right, he includes that Paul's the one, right, who's holding the garments. Right, and it's like just shows, right, and in some sense foreshadows, right, the involvement of Paul in the spread of early Christianity, right? Luke isn't afraid to share that Paul was this persecutor of the new Christian movement, right? But then becomes its biggest proponent, despite being someone who was trying to exterminate them
Yeah.
from this heretical sect of Judaism, you might call him at the time in his mind, right? And so it truly is an amazing testimony to the experience he has, right, with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really have much to say after that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, I think that the testimony of Paul is really one of the most incredible things. And I love to think about the fact that whenever Paul died and he entered heaven and he walked into there, the very people that he persecuted, the very people he imprisoned, the very people that he was responsible for the death of, greeted him with joy and laughter and embraces, because they knew that he had been made alive in Christ and that he was now saved. And I think that's such a beautiful picture of the Christian faith, and of how even the most decrepit, disgusting people to have ever existed are still able to be redeemed by the blood of Jesus. And I think that's really beautiful stuff. Real quick, we'll put this on the screen as well. For our audio listeners, you can go ahead and find that on our YouTube. But I'm going to run through our last couple of facts here. I have 12 total here. Again, 6 of these are 90% of scholars would agree are true. And then for the other 6, 75% of scholars would agree that they're true. So this paints a pretty good picture of kind of everything that was going on there. I'm going to run through these super quick, and then we'll talk about a little bit more of perhaps some alternate explanations for all of these facts right afterwards. So in addition to our 4 core facts, we know that he was buried. We know that Jesus' death caused the disciples to despair and lose hope, believing that his life was ended. We know that the tomb was discovered to be empty a few days later. This message of the resurrection of Jesus was the center of preaching in the early church. This message was especially proclaimed in Jerusalem, where Jesus died and was buried shortly before. As a result of this preaching, the church was born and it grew. Sunday became the primary day of worship instead of the traditional Saturday, which was the Sabbath day for Jews back then. And finally, James, the brother of Jesus, who was always a skeptic of him, was converted to the faith whenever he also believed he saw the resurrected Jesus. So of those 8 other facts, what of those do you think stands out the most to you? What of those would you say you incorporate the most often into your conversations with people?
Yeah, I think one for me that's been really compelling recently has been the fact that the gospel message was first spread in Jerusalem, right? Like that was the very place where Jesus was crucified, and this was a public event, right? And so if these things didn't happen, people would just be like, you know what, you're being ridiculous, right? And at the time, people probably could have gone to the tomb and, well, I mean, it was guarded, but they probably could have, if the tomb was not empty, the Roman guards could have just went in there, took the body, drug it across the city and been like, well, there your scheme's over, right?
Yeah,
Your message is done, right? But the very fact that the apostles, right, they begin proclaiming the message of the risen Jesus in the very place where he was crucified is just, I think, an amazing testimony to the truthfulness of the story, or at least provides a strong case that Jesus, whatever happened, right? Even if you're a skeptic and you don't believe that Jesus was resurrected, whatever happened was irrefutable by the people at the time.
Yeah, it is definitely difficult to imagine that Jesus' body was still in the tomb at that point. Because if they were so rambunctious and so loud about this fact that Jesus was resurrected, it'd be so easy for them to just open the tomb, grab his body, drag it through the street and say, hey, this is the guy that you say is still alive, and he's right here, not alive.
Yeah.
And
simple as that.
Yeah, it would have been
really
that
simple,
easy,
yeah.
but that didn't happen. So at the very least, we know that the tomb was empty at that point. I think for me, the one that's the most important, or maybe the most compelling, is the fact that James, the brother of Jesus, became convinced through this that Jesus really was God. I have 4 younger sisters, right? I have 4 siblings. Do you guys have any siblings?
Yeah.
I got 3 siblings, all younger.
I know that personally. It would take someone dying and rising again to convince me that my sibling was God, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if you are raised alongside someone like Jesus, you know him in and out, and you are skeptical of his ministry, and you suddenly have this life-changing moment where you are convinced that your own brother is God. I mean, something incredible has to happen. And I think that testimony of James is so interesting. And the same with Jude too, the other brother of
100%.
Jesus. So I think that's personally very compelling to me, and I love to bring that up in conversation on the street as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure even. Sorry,
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm not sure even if one of my siblings claimed to do something like that, I could believe them, right? Because I've watched the other 20 years of life that they would, you know, I'm like, yeah, it's ridiculous, no shot. But
I read this book a little while back titled "How Christianity Changed the World," and in the first chapter, I believe, it just lists the different emperors and the laws they put in place, and then how many Christians were murdered as a result of this. And I mentioned this because I'm going along with what you said. If the spread of the gospel began where Jesus was crucified, and then it began to spread, you would think, along with what Grant said, I would think that if I'm seeing people get killed for believing this thing, like I would not believe in this as well. But what we see is Justin Martyr says the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And then the church just continues to grow century after century after century. And so I think this is like, we have to ask the question, why is that? Why are so many people willing to die for something that as we get on, they didn't see themselves, right? So I think that's a pretty powerful thing.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so again, we're looking at these 12 different facts, and they all kind of paint this picture where if all of these are most likely true and agreed upon by all of these scholars, then what is the most likely reality? What actually happened? What makes the most sense of all this data that we have? It's like we have a bunch of different puzzle pieces, and you can put them together. You can try to make them fit in a couple of different ways, but which way makes the most sense? Which way is perhaps the easiest for all of them to fit together? And we're going to put another graphic on the screen right now. And it's basically this chart that we've found where it details all of the different potential things that could have happened instead of the resurrection. So for example, on here we have perhaps they had the wrong tomb, right? That the women went to the wrong tomb, they saw it was empty, and then they were like, oh, Jesus is actually up and running around. Or perhaps all 500 of the eyewitnesses hallucinated, and they all thought they saw Jesus, or something like that. There's a theory that the disciples stole the body and then decided to go out and say that Jesus had risen again. Or perhaps that even Jesus was an alien.
Yeah, I was going to say, do my favorite one. You got to do the favorite one.
And so there's all sorts of theories as to what actually happened. But you'll see on this chart here that right underneath it, you have a list of numbers. And these numbers correspond to some of those facts that we just talked about. So for each of these different theories, you have a certain number of these minimal facts that actually kind of refute the reality of perhaps that theory being true. So we can run through a couple of these together, and I'll let you guys kind of look at this here.
Okay. Yeah.
There you go. This is our scuffed little podcast setup here. So we have our theories on this page, and we have the minimal facts right there on that page.
Okay. And can I just say a quick note before we kind of dive into this? Yeah.
Of course.
Okay.
Dude, look at this
Wow,
coffee
man,
table.
Gideon's so nice.
I keep on putting my
know.
feet on this coffee table, and I keep on pushing it like a foot away from me.
Yeah.
But I think like one thing we should say is that all of these theories, right, they make an attempt to explain what plausibly happened, right? But combined, what we're saying is that when we put all these facts together, right, it is most probable that Jesus actually did resurrect from the dead, right? Like that has the most explanatory power, as historians call it, right? Like what makes the most sense of the data and what provides the most probable explanation for all of these different points of data that we have, right? And so I think ultimately, like that's what we're trying to show, right? Like Daquan said earlier, there's not a 1-2 knockout punch, right? That just kind of gives you guys a little move there. All right, anyway, yeah, like. It's all of the data combined. It presents a case that has a lot of explanatory power behind it,
Absolutely.
right? And so that's one thing I just wanted to kind of, put out there before as we're talking about these facts, right? And I think that's the intention of them as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So Daquan, you're looking at those alternate theories. Tell me, which one of those kind of stands out to you?
it's the alien one for me every time.
Yeah.
Every time it's the alien one.
The alien one is what we hear most often from the students. Like when
It's
we're going
funny,
to the
bro.
different,
It's funny.
Yeah, it is
Like,
funny.
Yeah. So we can probably address that one.
Sure. I mean, so Yeah, there is one special one on there that is the theory that Jesus was actually an alien and that he wasn't really a human. And the interesting thing about that theory is that, in a way, you're right. Jesus was 100% God and 100% man. That means that he had certain capabilities that humans do not have, including the power to rise from the dead, right? For us to say that Jesus, for us to explain this event that happened, our reasoning or our final theory is that Jesus was an alien. I think that that claim that he is some sort of supernatural being that is not from this world, it's completely right. You're right. Jesus is not, I guess, some ordinary human, but rather he is 100% man and 100% God.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead. But I was gonna say, I'll just go now. But yeah, a little breakdown in communication there. But hey, we're good. Anyway, I will say that I think it's important to keep in mind, right, that when we talk about Jesus being an alien, that one, Jesus never claims to be an alien, right? In so many words, and I'm sure we can talk about this some other time, Jesus very clearly is claiming to be the God of Israel, right? Whether it's through the titles that he uses to talk about himself, whether it's the Son of Man, the Son of God, Lord, Christ, like all these different things that he's called, they clearly point back to the God of Israel and not some alien, right? Not some supernatural being. And so nowhere is Jesus like claiming to be an alien, right? But that doesn't even fit, like we just talked about explanatory power, that doesn't even fit with the rest of the data that we have on Jesus, right? Sure, you could say that, Jesus is an alien is a plausible thing. Like, you know what, that could be a case, but that doesn't fit with, that's not the most plausible case that we have, or most probable. Get those two confused. Most probable case that we have, right? Like that, it doesn't make sense of the rest of the data, as well as the fact that Jesus was 100% man, 100% God, and he was a very specific God. He was the God of Israel, right? Coming down in human flesh, right?
And for more on that evidence that we have about Jesus claiming to be God, Daquan and I have another episode that we recorded a couple weeks back that I would encourage you guys to go watch.
Yeah.
Because that's a super important part of the resurrection, is that it confirmed all of those claims that Jesus made about himself.
Yeah. I would say what's true of all of these objections that try to explain away what we would say is the most plausible explanation is we can just ask them, like, to defend their claim. The rule is, if you make a claim, you have the responsibility to support it, right? So now put them in the hot seat, allow them to defend or substantiate their claim, and see what evidence they provide. My guess is that for a claim like Jesus is the alien, they probably don't have much. But anyways, I would, to go along with what you guys said, I think about actually a comment that a student made in a church that we went to. She referenced Jesus being born, and that means he was seen from birth and as he was growing up. And so that she used that as an argument to explain away the possibility of him being an alien, and which is another thing we would have to define our terms. What do we mean alien? Some people would probably think ET, right? Like Jesus wasn't ET, right? And so, and I think that was a pretty good explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also helps with a couple other of those claims. I mean, the one I think of is the twin theory, where Jesus had some sort of secret twin. Spoiler alert for The Prestige, the movie. Have you guys seen that movie?
Yes, that's a good movie.
Yeah, but it's like that kind of situation where he just had a secret twin his whole life.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Jesus died, but then his twin came out and he's like, "Yo, I'm Jesus," and stuff like that. But you're right. If these are the same people that he lived alongside for 33 years, and he was able to convince his brother James, right, who probably would have known about Jesus' twin brother, and his own disciples and stuff like that. It's just simply implausible to come to that conclusion. That is more reasonable than just Jesus being God and resurrecting from the dead.
Yeah.
So, just to kind of wrap things up, I'm curious, whenever you're having conversations with people on the street, normally you're not going to go through all 12 of these points. But it is really important, I think, especially with those people that are kind of spiritual and believe there is a God, but don't know exactly which God is real, or maybe even have no desire to believe or to know which God is real, to go to this argument right here. That if Jesus claimed to be God, died, and rose again, then does that not confirm his own claims? So how do you guys incorporate some of these elements that we've been talking about into your everyday conversations?
Yeah, with the minimal facts specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, like I mentioned, we kind of talked about this before. I want to know what each person's hangup is. And if I can figure out what their issue is for the resurrection, that's the route I want to take. And so if they think maybe you can't trust the disciples, they made it up, they had some kind of agenda. Okay, let's talk about why it's not a plausible explanation that the disciples could have just made this up. Would you be willing to die for something that you know is not true? The disciples were in a position better than anyone else to know for sure whether or not Jesus actually rose from the dead or is his body still in the tomb. And that's kind of the approach that I like to take because one, it addresses their concerns, understanding that each person, that I'm answering a person and not an argument. So that was how, yeah.
Yeah, I would say for most people, ultimately, they're not as compelled by seemingly historical facts as much as people's experience, right? And so when I think about, how do I share the resurrection, or what are some facts that are going to compel someone during a conversation, I often go to the story of James and Paul, right, where they believed one thing, and as a result of an experience, right, they changed their mind about their beliefs, right, and begin to live totally different. And I think ultimately that is something that even people today can relate to, right, because it's not just like these facts, like why I would believe in the resurrection personally, but it's because as I have stepped into a living relationship with Jesus, right? Because Jesus' resurrection, right, means that he is now alive, right? God is not someone that's far off and distant and from you, but is alive and wanting to be in relationship with you. And ultimately, like, it's because as I've watched, as I've lived within the Christian story, I have seen Jesus transform my own life, right? And so, I mean, when I'm sharing the resurrection with people, oftentimes I try to tap into the experiential element of it. Like, these people experienced something and it changed what they believed, and it ultimately changed the course of the rest of their life. And also, I have experienced something. I've encountered the risen Jesus, maybe not in the same way, but I've encountered the risen Jesus, and he has transformed and shaped my life, right, as I've stepped into relationship with him.
That's an excellent adaptation for this kind of culture that we're in right now.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I find that anytime I talk about the resurrection and perhaps some of these facts with people on the street, our goal is never to blindside people and just like overwhelm them with evidence and then have them feel really confused or dumb or unprepared or anything like that, and then end up becoming very defensive. And it can be really easy to overwhelm people with the evidence and stuff like that. And I always, I very rarely get any pushback on any of these points whenever it comes to the resurrection and its validity. Whenever I come at this from an approach talking about how the historical data all points to these facts being true, then it's very difficult to refute any of these facts, which is why this argument is so powerful. But it can be really easy to get so caught up in the weeds, and then you get them to a point where it's like, yeah, I guess if the resurrection is true, then Jesus really was God. And then breaching that gap there from, okay, if the resurrection is real, then Jesus is God. If Jesus is God, what does that mean for you?
Yeah.
Does that actually impact the way that you live or what you believe in anyway? Because if it doesn't, then we've failed to communicate something very, very important about the resurrection. Yeah. And that is that through the resurrection of Jesus, we now have access to eternal life. And we now have access to becoming new creations in Christ Jesus. And that is available to you right now. Yeah. And it's so, so important that we keep this not only an intellectual exercise, right? We're not trying to get a bunch of people just to believe in the resurrection, but not to have this sort of life-changing belief in Jesus Christ. And so always ensure that we're not just info dumping on people and assuming that they're going to draw the right conclusion from that reality.
Yeah.
Right.
But always make sure that you bring it home to the fact that if this is true, this should mean something very, very life-changing for you.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, I remember having a conversation where we assumed like she just had good reasons as to why she didn't want to trust in the resurrection, but what we found out was that she just didn't know anything about Jesus. And so we didn't, instead of laying out any evidence at all we did was share the gospel. At the end of this conversation, she decided to put her faith and trust in Jesus. And so again, this is why like each is like a case study, like you mentioned before. So yeah. And I think it's really helpful to go back again to 1 Corinthians 15, because I think a great hope can be found there.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and that Paul he puts something in 1 Corinthians 15 that he gets from Hosea, that is not death nor life, not angels nor demons. And he gives this list of things that cannot separate us from the love of Jesus Christ. And we have that love and we have the forgiveness of sin through his death and through his resurrection. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, the last thing that I'll say is that the facts themselves, right, are only controversial to a small group of scholars, right? Like most people you encounter on the street, when you present a case about, man, this is some evidence that Jesus actually did rise from the dead, most people are going to have very little to say in response to just the facts by themselves. But it's what they all say together, right? That ultimately, if Jesus really did rise from the dead and his claims to God, to being God, are validated, that it requires your allegiance, right? It means that you ultimately ought to respond properly to God's call in your life, right? To place your faith and your trust in Jesus and to follow him. And that's a challenging message for the world to hear, right? And it's not ultimately this fact or this fact, but all of them together that make that case, right? That make that case that following Jesus and giving your whole life to him is how to properly respond. And that's a challenging thing for most people to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we hope this has been encouraging and informational for you at home, listening, or in the car, wherever you're at the gym. I listen to podcasts at the gym. Can you tell?
You go to the gym?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think so.
So I'm wearing overalls.
He's got a 125
But
bench.
if you have other questions, maybe stories you'd like to share, be sure to leave a comment. Also, check out our socials and our blogs on our website. We have more of this in written form that you can access if you want to study more on this stuff. But we're really happy that we were able to do this for you, and we pray that God will be able to use this information in your life, not only to impact others around you, but also perhaps to give you this reignition of hope that we have in the resurrection of Jesus. So with that, I think we're about to head out to Drizzy Mike's.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll have Grant call ahead and get Mike up and stretch him.
Get him up and ready.
Yeah, I know. Got a CC Mike on that sub. Never mind. All right. Anyways.
Gideon does not carry receipts.
All right. Y'all have a good one. Y'all have a bye-bye.
God bless.